They arrived in the room, leaving behind Gabriel, who was still in a fit of laughter. After they took their seats in the prince's palace, they again remained silent for a while, not sure who was going to start speaking. As a man, Jack decided to take the initiative to speak, so he cleared his throat and was just about to speak when Celine cut in. "Jack, these two are my friends. They are Wendy and Angie, but I think that the three of you know each other. Wendy, Angie, this is Jack, the owner of this mansion. He's been helping me here in Incoat City," Celine said as she gazed at the two. "Well, I don't think I need to reintroduce the relationship between Celine and I, so I can say that Jack and I are acquaintances. We met in Crystal City 1 year ago and last week in Venture City," Wendy spoke. She had decided not to speak about the engagement between the two of them in Jack's presence. He had already said that he didn't acknowledge the engagement. Just to make sure that the relationship that was already weak wouldn't collapse, she wasn't ready to say something that would displease Jack. Seeing that the ladies had explained the relationship between them, Jack decided not to meddle and let things be as they were. Additionally, he was impressed that Wendy didn't say that he was her fiancé. Had she actually insisted that he was her fiancé, he would definitely make sure that he maintained a good distance from her. He didn't recognize the engagement and neither did he know Wendy for him to actually agree to it. On the other hand, Angie frowned. Wendy actually said that she and Jack were actually acquaintances. This was completely out of her expectations. Hadn't Wendy told her that the two of them were engaged? What the heck with this acquaintances nonsense? She was just about to ask what was going on when she felt Wendy's grip on her hand. Seeing that Wendy was shaking her head at her, she decided not to say a word. At least for now, she wouldn't say a word and wait till they were alone. She would have to get answers from this lady. Having cleared everything, the group chatted for a few minutes before Jack went upstairs to refresh and take a rest. According to the agreement, they would be leaving at 10. So, since it was still 6 in the morning, he thought that he still had time to relax his stiff muscles a bit. After taking a shower, Jack jumped on the bed and was about to close his eyes when they shot open. That was because he had just received a system prompt that reminded him of the time that he had gotten the system. First month of income earning, rewarded with Glaze Hotel. It was only a single prompt, but it had reminded him of something important that he had actually forgotten. But at the same time, he actually remembered that today was actually on Saturday, the first day of August. In other words, this was going to be the second month that he was going to start. Although he had gotten the system on 13th of July, the system evaluated things differently. Although it was true that it had yet to be a month since he had gotten the system used the normal calendar. So, according to the system, a month had gone by. And he had been earning during this month. Even though it was only from betting in the grocery department, at least, he had earned something big. Additionally, all the other incomes from the institutions and companies was going to be multiplied on this very day. Of course, this only applied to the security company, the hospital, and the medical research center. Then, there was another thing that he was going to receive as well. That was the first income reward. Back to what he had just received at the moment. He had just been awarded with Glaze Hotel. Just like Good Vision Security Limited, Glaze Hotel was a well-known hotel business in the country. It had several branches all over the country. Although not every city had the branch hotel, at least Incoat City had one. Although Jack had yet to confirm the actual value of Glaze Hotel, he was sure that it was nothing small. It had to be worth at least $10 billion. Without wasting time, I'm thinking, he got his phone and searched for the details of the hotel. And soon, he found the results that he was looking for. Glaze Hotel, a 5-star hotel with branches in over 30 cities in the country. Azima country itself had 5 provinces: Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern and finally Central Province. Amongst the 5 provinces, the Central Province was the leading one in terms of technological development. It was also where the capital was located. As for the other 4 provinces, they were far bigger than the Central Province. But, at the end of the day, they were the least developed. The reason for this being the fact that the current leader of the country was someone who thought that centralization was better. In other words, he thought that it was better to have the Central Province developed first before the fruits of the development are spread to the other 5 provinces. So, the other 4 provinces were actually not that much developed. Although they were not completely ignored, it was true that they were still lagging behind. The only saving grace of the 4 provinces was that they were the main source of food in the country. Since there was a lot of space, there were several plantations in the 4 provinces that were enough to satisfy the population with food. But of course, there were other things that had to be imported from other countries as it was obvious that the climate in the country couldn't support every type of crop. Back to the topic, in Izima country, there were 57 cities. With Glaze Hotel already spreading to 30 cities, one could see that it had covered over half of the cities. The main focus of the hotel was obviously the central province. The region had 7 cities. These 6 cities had been greatly developed just like Kartu City. So, Glaze Hotel had spread to these 7 cities, and after that, there were a few other cities that were randomly selected to have a branch. But the top management of the hotel had plans to have the hotel spreading to all cities in the country. But it seemed that he would have to take on that. After calming down a little, Jack thought of something that he had always not thought of before. How does the system actually get these assets? You don't have to worry about that. The system has already created a group that can be viewed as a legal one. This group has money. So, it is assumed by others that the group bought the companies or shares for you. So, all that you need to do is to put your signature and everything will be solved. One more thing, if the bank investigates the money that is coming to your account once the multiplier effect takes place, they would find that the source is the group. Jack was amazed by the system. It actually had such an ability. He was now curious about the group that the system had made. What's the name of this group? Don't mind that. You'll know about it in the future. Maybe you will be rewarded with that group as long as you complete a certain requirement or there is a need for that to happen. Jack shook his head. The system was actually trying to play mysterious here. Anyway, since it was said that he would know about it in the future, he decided to not think about it for the time being. But then, he came with an idea that made him excited. System, can you help me with the issues of the signatures? I don't want to start moving around in the future just for a signature. The system was silent for a moment before finally replying. The role of the system here is to make sure that the host knows the importance of working hard. If you are lazy to even move around to sign the transfer agreement, won't the system actually being hosted by a lazy host? Jack had his mouth hanging for a while. He was actually speechless. What the heck with the system? Wasn't it just a signature? Anyway, Jack thought for a moment before replying. Just imagine that I will have to get from the southern province and head to the northern province. All just so as to put a signature? Won't that be a waste of time? Jack then continued, that time could be used by me to do other things. It's not like I will be idling. One more thing, the time that I will be spending on the plane while traveling, wouldn't I be lazing around? You can just ask them to bring the contract to you. Jack. He actually didn't know what to say for a moment. But, as a human, he obviously had something to say. But, I will have to set time aside just to put a signature. The time that I will be going through the documents and chatting with the one that brought the agreement over, that would be a waste of time. There was no reply again for a period of time. Then, the reply came only after 2 minutes. Okay then. The system will help you in completing all the procedures for the transfer of the shares and other assets. But, in return, with every company you get, you will have half a year to increase the net value by 100%. Jack was at first satisfied, but when he heard the condition for that to happen, he couldn't help but want to complain. But, thinking about the situation, he thought that all the same, he was going to increase the value of the companies. As for the half-a-year timeline, he was sure that he would manage. With time, he was sure that his influence would have grown to a greater extent and that he would be able to easily solve that problem. Jack was so confident about this in that he forgot about something important. The net worth of a company didn't simply depend on the amount of money that was invested. It needed more than that. A good example would be the research institutions. No matter the amount of money, unless the scientists managed to complete the research and had gotten positive results, the amount of money wouldn't matter. Then, another system prompt appeared. This time, Jack was clearly even more excited about what was coming next. Get ready, the income of the companies that are multiplied on a monthly basis is up next, be prepared. Immediately after that, the prompts began coming in. You've earned $34.5 million from Good Vision Security Limited, Amber Securities and Safety Enforcers in the previous month. Multiplier applied. You received $3.45 billion. First income. As a reward, you gained 3 mil Mi-26M helicopters. You've earned $76.3 million from Brightway Medical Research Center and Hope Hospital in the previous month. Multiplier applied. You received $7.63 billion. First income. As a reward, you gain a comprehensive speed CT scanner and the recipe for the anti-leukemia pills. Do you want to get the first income reward of the grocery department, or would you still like to continue accumulating? 5 system prompts came in one after the other. And followed by that was the vibration of his phone to indicate that there was money that had been received in his account. Jack took a deep breath and replied, "Let it continue accumulating. I will retrieve the reward when necessary." He had been saving the first income reward of the new grocery stores that he had been buying so far just to make sure that the reward that he would receive would be of high quality. Jack then began analyzing the rewards one after the other. The 3 security companies had given him $34.5 million. This was the money that was earned since the moment that he had taken over. Being that most of the contracts were signed during the start of the year, it was obvious that he wasn't going to receive a lot of money till the following month. Anyway, the $34.5 million had been multiplied to a good $3.45 billion. This was a good amount of money that he had earned here. It was already boosting him towards the $50 billion account balance target. Brightway Medical Research Center and Hope Hospital had also performed quite well, giving him more than $70 million. The main income came from the research center due to the success in research during the past years. The medicine that was sold by the research center was the main income earner. Although Hope Hospital could also have been a good source of income, Jack knew that it was still lagging behind the leading hospitals. In other words, he would have to work hard to make sure that Hope Hospital caught up and surpassed the other hospitals. As for making the hospital a monopoly, Jack was sure that it was going to be impossible, as the government would surely be involved. The government had several medical research and pharmaceutical companies in the country. So, if he had a dream of monopolizing the pharmaceutical industry, he would be going against the government. Now, to the rewards that he had received. This time, the system was generous enough to give him the descriptions of the rewards. MIL Mi-26M helicopters. These are heavyweight transport helicopter with twin engines. It has the following characteristics. Crew: 5 men. Length: 40 meters. Main rotor diameter: 32 meters. Height: t 8.14 meters. Weight: empty, 28.2 t. Weight: maximum takeoff, 56 t. Engines: 2XZ-MKB Progress D136 turbofacts. Engine power: 2 by 10,000 shp. Maximum speed: 295 km per hour. Service ceiling: 4.6 km. Range: 1,952 km. Typical load: 80 troops. Looking at that information, one could tell that these helicopters were meant for the military or something related to that. Having a carrying capacity of 80 troops, it could easily deploy the guards in case of emergencies. This was something that Jack was looking forward to. He had previously asked Maxwell to purchase 1 or 2 helicopters if possible. But now that he had been rewarded by the system, Jack was happy. He had 3 of them. Total troops that could be deployed would be 240. If he created a team that had 20 people, he would be having 12 teams. Then, each helicopter would have 4 teams. He could as well merge the 4 teams and form a platoon that had 80 men. So, each platoon would be assigned a helicopter. Although he was currently having a single team, squad, he could still ask Denali to have more of them created. Comprehensive Speed CT Scanner. A medical equipment that is used to scan a living being's body. It works at a high speed and gives out all the comprehensive details that can be found or according to the specialization of the scan. This was what came from the first income reward of Hope Hospital. This was something that was going to be delivered there. But of course, Jack wouldn't do such a thing at the moment. He would make sure that he owned 100% of the shares of the hospital first. Currently, he was holding 70% shares. The total value of the hospital was $500 million. So, in his hands, there was $350 million. The remaining 30% shares could be acquired after spending about $200 million. Of course, the 30% was worth $150 million, but, to get them as fast as possible, he could as well offer $200 million. Anti-leukemia pills. These are the pills that can prevent a person from getting blood cancer. In other words, even if one experiences the high radiations, he would definitely not get leukemia. Note: the pill immunizes a person who doesn't have leukemia to make sure that he wouldn't be affected by leukemia. But, if a person plays with dangerous radiations, the immunization wouldn't help that person escape from the other effects that come from the radiation. It does not heal leukemia. That was something that he had been looking forward to a lot. The recipe that would boost the reputation and value of Brightway Medical Research Center. Although the pills couldn't heal leukemia, They would definitely prevent any further cases of leukemia. In other words, as long as the current generation received the anti-leukemia pills, she would definitely not suffer from leukemia. Jack was extremely excited. After the production of the body-strengthening pill was completed, he would definitely make sure that the anti-leukemia pills were produced. Although it would take a good period of time for the pills to go through the clinical trials and the approval from the medical department, he was sure that it wouldn't take more than 2 months. As Jack was busy with the rewards that he had received, the girls on the other hand were chatting with each other, trying to understand the relationship between Jack and the other one. "You mean that you and Jack are engaged?" Celine asked as she looked at Wendy in disbelief. She couldn't believe that Wendy had already gotten engaged. Additionally, there was a pang of pain in her heart as she thought that Jack had a fiancé already. She felt that she had lost something important and she couldn't help but feel dejected. Yes. But, I was the one that suggested the engagement. I told my grandpa that I loved Jack. So, we went to Jack's home and my grandpa and Jack's father came to an agreement that the two of us can be engaged," Wendy replied. She could tell that Celine definitely had feelings for Jack. But, she too had feelings for him and they were intense. She just couldn't give up on him. "You know Jack's family?" Celine asked in a low voice. Till this time, she had never tried investigating Jack's background, hoping that he would tell her. But at the end of the day, it seemed that someone had beat her to it. "Yes, he's from Alfonso family of Crystal City," Wendy replied. But at the same time, she was doubtful about this. After all, the Bugatti Veyron, the cars that were bought out there, the mansion, the Eurocopter, these things totally didn't add up to Jack's background at all. Even if Jack was the most favored young master of the Alfonso family, she was sure that there was no way that he could get all these things. Additionally, Alfonso family was at a lower level as compared to her family. And since her family didn't have the connections to get the Bugatti Veyron, how could the Alfonso family? She was wondering if it was true that Jack owned this place or if he was living in someone else's house. Alfonso family? Why does it sound familiar? Although this was the first time that she was hearing this name, Celine felt that this wasn't the case. There was some sense of familiarity to this name but she couldn't make out where the familiarity came from. After thinking without getting anything, she simply shook her head. Thinking of Crystal City, Celine continued doubting whether it was true that Jack was from that family. The way that Jack was spending money was as if he had a lot of it. To buy the whole building and the cars. To buy the stores and the mansion. Since the Alfonso family was located in Crystal City, which was larger as compared to Incoit, there was no way that they were going to waste their money to develop in a small city instead of trying to enter the market of the larger cities. Angie didn't say a word this time. She too wanted to know what was going on. At first, she was only interested in the fact that Wendy didn't say that Jack was her fiancé in his presence. But, as they talked of Jack's background, her interest grew. She was wondering what secrets he was hiding. But, for now, she had to confirm something first. "Wendy, what are you trying to hide from us? In Jack's presence, you said that you two are acquaintances. Now, why would you say that? Was he threatening you?" she asked with narrowed eyes. "Wendy, what are you trying to hide from us? In Jack's presence, you said that you two are acquaintances. Now, why would you say that? Was he threatening you?" she asked with narrowed eyes. Wendy got flustered at the moment. She wasn't sure about how to reply to this. After thinking for a moment and looking at the two friends of hers that she considered as sisters, she decided that she would simply say the truth. "Actually, it's like this. During the engagement, Jack wasn't present in Crystal City. So, the engagement was completed without him knowing. And Jack wasn't told about the engagement by his father. It's like they were hiding it from him." Wendy paused before continuing. "He learned from me that we were engaged already. But, he doesn't acknowledge the engagement at all. He said that since that was planned and agreed by his father, then his father had to handle it. Additionally, he was no longer a member of the Alfonso family, so, any plans that were made with the Alfonso family didn't involve him." As she spoke, she felt bitter. After all, she really loved Jack. But, her love was one-sided and was not reciprocated. Jack was already living with Celine, although not in the same mansion, they were still living in the same compound at the end of the day. On the other hand, Jack had already bluntly told her that he didn't love her. But, although that was to be expected as he didn't remember her, it still hurt to be rejected by the person that she loved dearly. One might think that this was love that was born due to gratitude that she had towards him for saving her, but that wasn't the case anymore since a few months after she began watching him. She had fallen in love with him and for that reason, she had thought that by marrying him, she would be able to express her thanks well, In the end, she thought so little, forgetting to consider whether he would agree to marry her or not, whether he already had a girlfriend or not. All the same, she wasn't willing to give up. He had decided that he wouldn't agree to the engagement, she wouldn't break it. She would definitely make sure that he loved her just like she loved him. So, that's how it was. Celine for some reason let out a sigh of relief. Since Jack hadn't accepted the engagement and was willing to break it, she thought that she had a chance. Although she thought that it wasn't good that she loved the same man that her sister did, what could she do? And yes, she was forced to admit at this moment that she had indeed fallen in love with Jack. At first, it could be said that she was simply attracted to Jack, but after spending time with him, knowing how honest he was with her, she had fallen in love with him. Additionally, the way that he went out of his way just to help her out, how could her heart remain steady? That guy snatched it away from her. As for how he felt about her, she wasn't sure. Maybe he treated her like a friend, or maybe a sister, or he looked at her like a lady, a potential partner, that had yet to be known. After all, although he always stared at her, he had never shown lust. He instead showed appreciation for her beauty. Now that she had admitted to herself that she really loved Jack and she wouldn't mind to be his girlfriend, she was getting nervous. From Wendy's expression, she could tell that Wendy was indeed hurt. And she wasn't ready to experience the pain that came from one-sided love. If Jack said that he didn't love her, she wasn't sure about what she was going to do. But one thing remained the same, she would definitely get hurt. Looking at the two girls who had strange expressions on their faces, Angie shook her head. What happened here? Two girls have fallen for a single man? This isn't happening, right? Angie doubted herself at the moment. The three of them had been close friends and called each other sisters. And from the way that she was seeing, things were definitely not going to end well here. Each of the two girls had their own advantage here. Celine and Jack were familiar to each other. As a result, she had the highest advantage and possibility of making Jack fall in love with her. On the other hand, Wendy had familial advantage. Her grandfather and Jack's family all supported the engagement between the two of them. And from the looks of it, the two families would definitely not allow the engagement to be broken. Wendy's grandfather doted on her. So, it was obvious that he wouldn't let his granddaughter to get hurt. So, he might use other means to make sure that Jack didn't dare to leave Wendy. On the other hand, Alfonso family was a small family. It would surely like the benefits that would come with the marriage between Wendy and Jack. And although Celine also had the same background as Wendy, the Alfonsos had already acknowledged the engagement between the two. It was obvious that they wouldn't easily agree to break it considering the reputation of the Farrell family. You two, are you going to fight for a man? Angie asked. She wasn't ready to see the friendship that they had built for years crumbling just because of the appearance of a man. The two ladies gave Angie stares that told her to stay out of the matter. Knowing that she definitely wouldn't be able to convince them otherwise, Angie decided to think of a way to solve this problem. She contemplated for a while before she finally came to a decision. She would have to make these two ladies forget about Jack, or she could as well make sure that Jack chose one of them. At least, it could be said that it was his choice and the two sisters of hers wouldn't have to fight it out with each other. As Angie was deep in thoughts, the two ladies came to a decision. Wendy, Jack hasn't confessed to any of us yet, right? Why don't we compete fairly? Whoever he chooses, the one that's not chosen shouldn't feel resentment for the other. What do you think? Wendy knew that Celine was giving her an advantage here. Jack had clearly said that he wasn't interested in her. Otherwise, he wouldn't have blatantly told her to forget about him. On the other hand, Celine had stayed with him for a certain period of time and she understood him the most. Jack's willingness to allow Celine to live here was definitely a proof that he might be having some feelings for Celine. So, although Celine had the greatest advantage, instead of simply saying that since Jack had told her to forget him she had to give up, she was giving her the chance to make Jack fall in love with her. As she thought of this, she felt sweet in her heart. She decided that no matter the results, she would definitely not hate this sister of hers. Although she would be hurt to lose the one that she loved, at least her sister would be happy. Okay then, it's a deal. Wendy nodded as determination could be seen in her eyes. Angie, who was listening from the side, shook her head again. But all the same, she felt that this result was far better than the two starting to argue with each other. But all the same, she had to make sure that Jack would hurry things up and select one of them or none. The earlier the girls knew who he loved, the earlier they would try forgetting about this issue. In Crystal City, Brenda was just coming out of a mall. She had just finished shopping when her phone rang. Looking at the contact, she found that it was her mother. Hello Mom. Brenda was confused as to why her mother would call her when she had only left home for about an hour. "Brenda, where are you now?" Marian asked. From her voice, Brenda could tell that this was urgent. "I'm done shopping in the mall." "What happened?" Brenda asked. "What you needed has already arrived. You should know what to do, right?" Marian asked. Brenda's eyes lit up at that moment. "It seems that I can solve things earlier than I had thought. Although there is a year and 2 months till the wedding day, it will be better if I can deal with this as early as now." A cold glint flashed across her eyes as she thought of this. Her lips curled into a cold smile, a complete contrast to her usual cute expression. Remembering where she was, she immediately regained her previous cute expression. She then responded, "I got it, Mom. I'll be back in a few minutes." "That's good. You better deal with it. If things overwhelm you, you can simply tell me and I'll help you," Marian said before hanging up. "Okay then. Let's get those rewards," Jack said to himself before he began making arrangements. "System, I would like to have the 3 helicopters delivered once the merging of the security companies is completed. As for the comprehensive speed CT scanner, I would like it to appear only after I have acquired all the shares that are remaining in Hope Hospital." Got it. This was the advantage that he was taking. Instead of having things delivered at once, at least, he could get them at the right moment. After he was done with the system, he took his phone and called Denali. "Can you make arrangements to acquire the remaining 30% shares of Hope Hospital?" "Got it, boss." Jack was done with the system prompts at the moment, so he decided to take a rest first. They would be leaving at around 10. Now, it was already 7 in the morning. He still had around 2 hours. Jack was woken up by a knock on the door. It was Celine, reminding him that it was almost time for them to depart. Although Celine had previously had no intention of coming back to the Prince mansion after the swimming pool incidents, when she remembered that she was now competing with Wendy, she decided to take this opportunity to come upstairs and wake him up. But of course, the moment that Jack woke up, she had already rushed back downstairs, not waiting to be reminded of what had happened back then. Jack got out of the bed and headed downstairs after he was done with changing his clothes. He was fully prepared. Since they were going to hang out, there was nothing that he had to prepare other than dress properly and have enough money to spend. When he got downstairs, he found that Faith was also present. It seemed that someone had already prepared breakfast. He was impressed. After all, this could be said to be the first time that he had someone preparing him food in about 4 years, other than in the restaurants or stalls. He wondered who it was that had prepared the food, but he didn't ask questions about it. He was sure that the one that had cooked would surely reveal herself. After sitting around the dining table, the group of 5 began eating while chatting. Since Faith was just a few years older than the other 4, she was able to chat with the 3 girls comfortably. On the other hand, Jack was almost left out, as the things that they were talking about were mainly concerning the ladies. He is a man, what could he say? After breakfast, Celine asked, "Jack, how is my cooking?" Jack was a little surprised. He asked, "You're the one that had prepared the breakfast?" He had been staying here with Celine for 2 days. But, in none of those 2 days did she offer to prepare the food for them. It was always the other way round. He prepared the meal. He always took himself as the host, so there was no way that he was going to let a visitor cook for him. Even today, had it not been for the fact that he was sleeping, he would have definitely cooked. But, if the ladies offered to cook, he would gladly accept. "What? You thought that I couldn't cook?" Celine pouted unhappily. Being the first time that he had seen her making such an expression, Jack was obviously stunned. But all the same, he would just go on and stare. Celine herself hadn't realized that she had greatly opened up to Jack from the moment that she had admitted to herself that she indeed loved Jack. So, she was now showing the side that she always showed to her mother and sisters. Although she was quite free with Jack, she was still reserved in the least. Noticing Jack's fixated gaze on her, she blushed a little when she noticed that she had just pouted. She glared at Jack and asked, "What are you looking at? Do you think that I can't cook? How else can I know that you are a good cook when I have never seen you cooking?" Jack shrugged his shoulders in response. "All the same, you're good." Celine smiled brightly. It seemed that she wasn't that bad. She had trained back at home. That was something that her mother had insisted that she had to know. After breakfast, the group was supposed to meet up with the other young masters and ladies from the capital in a resort in Volant City. The resort's name was Adventure Recreation Resort. Although it was in a small city as compared to Kartu City, the level of technology here was high. The reason behind this being the fact that the resort was located in a place that was full of tourist attraction sites. And that was one of the reasons as to why they were going there. They would be staying there for 3 days before leaving. Since there were 4 of them, with Faith still going on to manage the company in place of Celine, they decided to use the Eurocopter. Although the distance between the 2 cities wasn't that big, it wouldn't hurt if they could get there faster. When they were on the roof of the garage, the 2 girls, Wendy and Angie, looked at each other. Fighting spirit could be seen in their eyes. Currently, it was a competition of who was going to sit next to Jack on the Eurocopter. They were just about to start discussing on who would, when they saw that Jack actually sat next to Gabriel. In other words, the girls wouldn't have the chance to be close to him during the trip. All the same, they simply pouted before they got into the Eurocopter. After that, the helo flew towards Volant City. Through air, they could get there after about half an hour. Had they actually used cars, it would take them at least 4 hours. 30 minutes later, Gabriel landed on a field of the resort. This was the area that had specifically been prepared for those that came here on their helicopters. The resort was some distance from Volant City. It was located at the center of a forest. After alighting, Wendy sent a message to one of the girls to inform her that they had arrived. They were then informed that the group was currently in a basketball court. It seemed that they were currently watching a basketball game that was taking place in one of the basketball courts here. It was just coincidental that there was a match that was ongoing here. The group of 4 hurried to the basketball court. It was indoors, but there was already a considerable crowd that had gathered here. The seats were already almost filled up. Luckily, it was still morning, and so, there were a few seats that had yet to be occupied. Jack followed the girls who were familiar with the area. Having been texted where to go, Jack and the others headed to one of the corners. There, Jack saw the young masters and ladies that he had seen back in Venture City. Currently, they had already reserved chairs for the 4 of them. When they saw Jack, although they were surprised, it was not by much. The one that had reserved the 4 seats was a girl that was close to Wendy. She was the one that had told Wendy the location. Of course, there was definitely someone who was not happy to see Jack. Collins gazed at Jack coldly. All the same, he didn't express it as he simply smiled and welcomed Jack. Jack already had a bad impression of these young masters, so he didn't even bother to smile at them. In response to their greetings, he simply nodded. Seeing this, although they were dissatisfied, they didn't dare to express their dissatisfaction. He was Wendy's fiancé at the end of the day. If they targeted him and angered Wendy, they would definitely be in trouble. But it was obvious that not all of them were afraid of that. Seeing that Jack didn't give him face, Collins decided in his heart that he was going to make sure that Jack was embarrassed. Additionally, he would definitely make sure that he disappeared. After all, he could see that Jack was actually close to the 2 ladies. Although he had never asked Celine out, he still had her as his target. As long as he failed to get Wendy, he would simply change the target to Celine. But all the same, although he wasn't chasing her at the moment, he still wouldn't allow anyone to get close to her. Jack obviously noticed Colin's malicious gaze on him. He simply thought that this guy was angry that he hadn't greeted him back. But all the same, he didn't care at all. If this guy dared to play any tricks on him, he would definitely make sure that he paid for it. Jack was definitely not a fan of basketball. But he could only watch the game with the girls. He had promised to accompany them. So, it would definitely not be good if he simply left, right? So, during this whole time, Jack didn't pay much attention to what was happening. He was currently thinking about what he was supposed to do. He had to plan for the future. Although he could still receive companies from the system, that didn't mean that he wouldn't develop the ones that were under his name. Taking out his old phone, he checked the balance in his account. Flyers bank savings account balance is $16,935,074,216. It could be said that he was almost halfway to the $50 billion target. But that was something that could be achieved as long as 5 companies under him managed to be monopolies in the market. Thinking for a moment, he decided that he was going to start with the security company. Since the company had the advantage in terms of helicopters, the body strengthening pills, and what's more, he had a subordinate there, Ayush, who could take care of the company. He would focus on it. So, that was going to be his first one. After getting back to Kartu City, he would have to make sure that the merging was completed as fast as possible. Additionally, they had to start expanding. As for the branches that had almost been ignored in small cities like in Kohat, they would have to be revived. No matter the city, whether big or small, he would make sure that he dominated it. After all, how could he be a monopoly if he didn't actually have influence in each city? While Jack and the others were inside the court, watching the game or contemplating on what to do, Brenda was inside a room in the same adventure recreation resort. Here, she was looking at a middle-aged man in front of her. This was the meeting place that they had agreed to meet. The man in front of her was a mercenary. According to the information that she had received from her mother, Marion, this guy could do the dirty work that she had. "Can you kill him within a week?" Brenda asked. The man's face had a smile at this moment as he looked at the information that he had been given. The information was all about Jack. "Young miss, there's no problem for me to deal with him at all. I have done more tricky ones. To deal with such a small brat will be a piece of cake. But, you have to fulfill your end of the deal," the man said. "Worry not, I keep my promises," Brenda smiled in response. After the man left, Brenda got onto her feet and headed to the window of her room. She opened the curtain to let the sun hit her face. As she was taking a deep breath, her movements immediately froze as she gazed down with a hint of surprise. Her lips curled into a malicious smile as she muttered, "Looks like you are unlucky. It seems that a week is not needed anymore. You can simply disappear today." At the same time, she gazed at the silver-haired youth who seemed to be getting out of the lodging area. Unique silver hair was shining in the morning sun. The game in the court continued, and after about an hour, it finally came to an end. During this time, Jack obviously didn't pay any attention to it. He would only occasionally chat with the two ladies that were seated next to him. As for the results of the match below there, he really didn't care at all. He simply got up when the match came to an end and people were leaving. It was already approaching noon. So, Jack thought that it wouldn't be bad if he found somewhere that he could relax. He was just about to leave with Celine, Wendy and Angie when Collins called out to him. "What's it?" Jack's brows furrowed as he asked. This guy already didn't like him. So, Jack was sure that there was nothing good if this guy called him. He must be having his own intentions or tricks that he wanted to play on him. Collins smiled and asked, "Since there's nobody playing, do you want to have a round with me?" He had already thought of a plan to embarrass Jack. Then, he would try to get to know about him before finally getting a way to deal with him. "I'm not interested in basketball." Jack shrugged his shoulders and decided to leave. He wasn't someone that would simply do things just because someone asked. Furthermore, it was true that he didn't like the game at all. So, he saw no need to entertain the little tricks that Collins was trying to play here. On the other hand, as a man, having asked Jack to have a game with him in front of the girls, he had expected that Jack would agree to this because he would definitely want to show off in front of the girls. The girls obviously liked strong men. And, basketball had many female fans, obviously proving that the ladies surely loved seeing the men dunking or blocking shots here. But, Jack's response was completely out of his expectations. He had not prepared what to say after Jack rejected him. Instead, he had already prepared a few words to make sure that Jack's reputation was completely tarnished. Celine and Wendy could already tell that something was wrong here. They were not fools. Collins had always been pursuing Wendy all along. And now that she was engaged, he would definitely try finding fault with Jack. Although they would really like to see Jack in action, they definitely wouldn't want to see him getting embarrassed. Additionally, they were not even sure if Jack really knew how to play basketball. Currently, there were several people who were still present. It was obvious that a small competition would catch their attention. In other words, as long as Jack agreed, he was bound to be embarrassed as long as he showed that he wasn't good in basketball. Jack's response immediately made them breathe a sigh of relief. They didn't think that Jack was a coward. Quite the contrary, they thought that he was good. After all, they knew that Jack was someone honest with his words. Since he said that he wasn't interested in basketball, then that was the truth. He did say that he wasn't interested, and it wasn't that he was weak. Collins' expression shifted for a moment and said, "It's okay if you don't know. You can still learn." He tried persuading, not willing to let Jack go. "I said that I'm not interested in the game, not that I don't know how to play." Jack responded without turning back. He continued leaving. Jack wasn't bragging at all. It was true that he wasn't interested in basketball at all. But, he knew how to play. The reason behind that was that he had just received a system prompt not long ago. Emergency mission program activated. Advance reward, professional basketball player. Accompanying task that you'll have to complete so that you can permanently have the reward is as follows. Task. Earn money by having a competition with another professional basketball player. Time limit, 15 days. Jack didn't waste any time and accepted the mission. Although he wasn't interested in basketball, he would definitely not give up a chance of receiving a skill from the system. Mission accepted. Advance mission reward granted. Task. Earn money by having a competition with another professional basketball player. Time limit, 15 days. Failure to complete the task would lead to the host losing the ability as well as receiving the system's punishment. The familiar prompt appeared a moment later. Then, memory fragments merged into his mind. At this moment, Jack felt extremely familiar with the basketball. It was as if he had been playing it for a long time now. So, with his skills, if he played with Collins, he would definitely embarrass him. But, Jack wasn't someone who would waste his time on such a trivial matter. Additionally, should get for something just because someone asked him to? That would definitely not happen. Had it not been for the mission, Jack wasn't even sure if he would have touched the basketball. But all the same, he decided that he was going to try and finish the task during this one-week vacation. Hey, since you know how to play, why not come and play? Or are you afraid? Collins shouted. I already told you that I'm not interested in playing. Are you deaf or something? Jack's voice drifted over as he walked out of the building where the basketball court was located. Collins' expression turned darker as he ferociously gazed at the direction that Jack had left. Remaining with him were a few of his lackeys as the others had also left the basketball court. The lackeys didn't dare to say anything at this moment. Although they would have wanted to taunt Jack and help their boss, they were not willing to offend Wendy. Although Collins was from a bigger family as compared to Wendy, that didn't mean that Collins' family would go against Wendy's for their sake. So, in this conflict, they had decided not to get themselves involved. At the end of the day, they would simply end up in a bad position. Humph, let's see if you really can escape this then. Collins came up with a plan before he left with his underlings. The middle-aged man that had been hired by Brenda, Viper, was currently following someone. The youth in front of him had silver hair and blue eyes. As he followed behind him, the middle-aged man smiled viciously. He was ready to do the killing as long as there was a chance. But of course, the killing couldn't be done here in the resort as the level of security was high. What he was waiting for was to have the youth in front of him get out the resort. Or, he could as well go to an area that was the least populated, where there were no cameras. As if his prayers were heard, the youth was actually heading towards an area that has no security cameras. The resort was in a forest that was close to Volant City. So, there were parts of the forest that were not monitored. He wasn't sure why this youth was going there. But all the same, since it was to his advantage, he would definitely make the most out of it. After about 30 minutes of walking, the youth suddenly stopped. Then, without even looking behind, he said in a cold voice, "You have been following me for some time now. What do you want?" Hearing the youth's words, the middle-aged man was surprised. He had been stealthily following this youth. But at the end of it all he was found out. Now he understood why this youth came to this place. He was actually bringing him here. To deal with him? Viper thought of this amusedly. Since he had already been noticed, he no longer hid. He came from behind the tree as he chuckled. You have some guts, boy. Even after knowing that I was coming after you, instead of staying within the crowd, you decided to come here. In any case, it doesn't matter. This makes things easier for me, Viper said lightly. Who are you? Or, who sent you to come after me? The youth asked. You should be Jackson Alfonso. There's no need for you to know who sent me after you. All you have to know is that the person that sent me wants you dead. So, it's obvious that you might have offended someone, but you don't know, Viper said as he approached the youth. Jackson Alfonso? What nonsense are you saying? I think you got the wrong person here. I'm not Jack. The youth frowned as he said these words. Hee hee, how can that be? I have your information. Oh, I even have an image of you. There's no way that you are not Jackson Alfonso considering that your face and features match with the ones I have. And, if you are trying to save yourself from me by pretending not to be Jack, then forget about that. That trick won't work on me. Viper sneered as he took out his phone before showing the face on the screen. Seeing his photo, the youth was definitely startled. Haha, you better be a little serious here. You can now simply Photoshop my head and add it to someone else's neck? I have never worn nor do I possess the shirt that the person there is wearing. The youth laughed as he pointed at the phone. Viper was stunned. But then, his expression turned cold as he asked, You dare think that I'm stupid not to recognize if the image in my phone is photoshopped or not? You're courting death. Immediately after that, he took out a dagger that he had been hiding in his belt and charged at the youth in front of him. You are here to kill me. So, what courting death are you talking about? As for killing me, let's see if you have the ability to do that. As he spoke, the youth charged forward without any hint of fear or hesitation. Viper swiped the dagger in his hand towards the youth's throat. If he could complete this easily, He would definitely be glad about that. Although this place was far from the crowd, nobody could say for sure that nobody would come here. Seeing the dagger heading for his throat, the youth immediately bent backwards, evading that strike. The moment that he rose up, he saw a punch heading his way. This time, he didn't evade, he parried it to the side before he threw a kick towards the other party's head. Viper was surprised that the youth in front of him was actually good in combat. Now, he began doubting the information that he had received. After all, the information stated that although he trained in the gym, he was definitely not a good fighter. But the way that the youth was handling his attacks, it seemed that he had experienced several fights before. Although he was having a weapon, he actually had no advantage over the youth at all. Even his experience as a mercenary seemed useless at this moment. As they exchanged blows, he found that he wasn't gaining any advantage at all. Instead, he was losing. As time went by, they exchanged more and more blows. The youth's attacks were ferocious. Even though he was good in combat, Viper had a weapon and experience. So, in the end of it all, he received several injuries from the dagger attacks. In return, he had managed to break one of Viper's hand, and now, although he was losing blood, he was sure that he could win. Viper was in severe pain at this moment. But all the same, he continued attacking, his mind focusing on the fact that he had to kill the youth in front of him. After all, this wasn't just a matter of his reputation, but it was because he was so angered at this moment. Brenda had told him that the youth was not good at fighting. In the end, he had his hand broken. Now, he wanted to vent his anger on the youth before getting that girl next. After a moment, he saw that the youth had made a mistake. Taking this chance, he immediately attacked towards the throat again, aiming to pierce the throat and end his life. After a moment, he saw that the youth had made a mistake. Taking this chance, he immediately attacked towards the throat again, aiming to pierce the throat and end his life. Just as the dagger was approaching the youth's throat, his movements suddenly sped up, showing no signs of the initial staggering. He caught the arm that was holding the dagger as he twisted it to the side, evading the blow. Immediately after that, using all the strength in his hands, he pulled Viper in. Before Viper could react, he was kneed on the chest. Reflexively, he tried pulling back his arm. But, in that spar of a moment, the youth had managed to pry the dagger from his hand. As Viper staggered backwards, the youth suddenly jumped forward and pierced the dagger through Viper's left chest, directly piercing his heart. Viper's eyes widened in disbelief as he gazed at the dagger that was currently in his body. He couldn't believe that he was going to die here. Furthermore, it was his own weapon that killed him. At this moment, he simply wished that he had investigated the person that he was told to assassinate first. He had thought that it was going to be something simple. In the end, he ended up dead. If he could, he would have definitely gone to where Brenda was and kill her with his own hands. After all, she was the reason as to why he was going to die. Had she provided him with the correct information, why would he have to attack recklessly? He would have used a gun to end the thing as fast as possible. As his thoughts drifted to wherever, his heartbeat slowed down. Before he could do a thing, the dagger that was stabbing through his heart was forcefully pulled out by the youth. Being the thing that was keeping his life to this moment, Viper felt his vision blurring as his consciousness sank into darkness. He fell into a deep and eternal sleep. Just like that, his life faded away as his body dropped to the ground. Blood kept on pouring from the wound on the chest. The youth's expression didn't change at all even after he killed the person. Instead, he looked at the dagger in his hand for a moment before he began wiping the blood on it using Viper's clothes. Immediately after that, he began hiding anything that could be used as evidence that he was involved in the murder. Although it was self-defense, nobody witnessed him being attacked first. So, if evidence was found that he was the one that had killed here, they would definitely make things hard for him. Gritting his teeth, he persevered the pain that came from the cut wounds that he had received. He took out his phone, that by luck, wasn't broken during the fight, and made a call. Send someone to Adventure Recreation Resort to do some cleaning up. The western part of the forest. Immediately after that, he hung up and began searching Viper's pockets. He found Viper's phone and decided to bring it with him. He had to know who was behind this incident. Angie was walking towards the forest to take a breather. She was tired of playing with the others and decided to come here and relax, while enjoying the cool and fresh air of the forest. The area that she had come to was cleaned up and there were several benches that people could sit on. But currently, most of the people were either in the swimming pool, or engaging in other activities that interested them. She took a sip of the mango juice in the box using the straw. Slowly, she leaned backwards as she relaxed. She stayed like this for about 5 minutes before she was interrupted by the sound of footsteps heading her way. She looked behind her instinctively. Ah! What she saw made her scream. There was a person whose whole body was bloodied. He was staggering forward and it seemed that he would fall at any moment. At first, Angie was simply scared to see such a bloody scene. But, she was even more horrified when she saw who the person was. Jack! What happened to you? Angie immediately rushed towards him and held him before he fell to the ground. She could tell that he had lost a lot of blood, so, it was normal that he was going to lose consciousness. At this moment, Angie's mind was in chaos. She couldn't believe what had happened here. Without wasting time, she shouted, "Help here, someone is injured, call an ambulance right now." Although it was true that where she was sitting before didn't have people, that didn't mean that there were no people close enough to hear her shouts. So, those that heard her immediately rushed in her direction. In just a minute, more than 7 people had arrived at the scene. And when they saw the bloodied youth, most of them felt their scalps going numb. A few of them even threw up as they were not used to such a bloody scene. On the other hand, a few men went forward to help with the first aid, to prevent the youth from losing even more blood. The others immediately called the resort management to inform them that there was someone that was injured. A few minutes later, the emergency department of the resort arrived and began giving the youth first aid. Although they were curious about why he was this hurt, they didn't ask, as even if they did ask, there was no way that the youth would answer as he was unconscious at the moment. Angie on the other hand had even forgotten to inform Wendy and Celine about this. It was only when the youth was placed inside the ambulance to be taken to the hospital that she remembered it. "What hospital are you taking him to?" she immediately asked one of the nurses that had come with the ambulance. "It's the Star Hospital," the nurse replied as she hurriedly got into the ambulance where the youth was. Angie followed in, and as the ambulance was being driven away, she made a call to her 2 sisters. At this moment, Celine was having a dark expression as she faced Collins, who was standing in front of her. Veins were nearly popping on her forehead as she was indeed angry at the moment. "What do you think, Celine? Can you be my girlfriend?" Collins asked with a smile. This was one of his plans. He had decided to try getting Celine before she fell for someone else, just like how Wendy had been taken by Jack. Although he was now hitting on Celine, that didn't mean that he was going to stop chasing after Wendy. He thought that all the beauties belonged to him. Since there was going to be some problem with Wendy for now, he might as well go for the one that had yet to be taken. After securing her and making sure that she was fully his, he would then go after Wendy. Celine took a deep breath and replied, "Collins, you better know that we are not meant for each other. I don't like you, so it won't work. And, weren't you chasing after Wendy previously? You have already changed your target after hearing that she was engaged?" Celine was angry with this kind of scum. After all, he only changed targets because something happened. It was either that he had found someone better looking or he had found out that he couldn't go after that lady due to her background. She didn't like Collins at all. In fact, she was disgusted at him because he was a scumbag. He always used his family influence to force girls into his bed. And now he was asking her out? There was no way that she was going to accept that. Additionally, she was now in love with Jack and there was no way that she could accept someone else. Not at all. I'm not joking when I say that I love you. It has been a month and a half since the last time that I chased after Wendy. It was during this month and a half that I realized that I have fallen for you. This has nothing to do with Wendy getting engaged. Collins gave his best smile as he replied. Even if you like me, I have said that I don't, so, please let me. Before Celine could finish what she was saying, her phone rang. She took it out and found that it was Angie. Wondering why she was calling, she received it. Hello, what's it, Angie? Celine asked. Come to Star Hospital as fast as you can, come right now, there's an emergency. Angie's anxious voice reached Celine. Wah, what happened, Angie? Celine was scared the moment that she heard Angie's anxious voice. It was rare to find her this anxious. Yeah. Jack has been injured and is being taken to the hospital right now, you better come, Angie replied. Celine's heart skipped a beat when she heard these words. Her eyes widened in disbelief as the phone in her hand dropped. Collins was wondering what happened when suddenly, he saw Celine rushing away. He wanted to stop her but, he held back, noticing that there might be something that had happened. Even so, his expression darkened as he watched her leave. He gritted his teeth and thought, I surely will make you mine, and so, he followed her, curious what was going on. Celine was rushing forward without caring about what others thought about her. With her mind in chaos, she suddenly bumped into someone. She was just about to leave when she was held back. The grip on her waist was strong enough not to let her leave. "Let me go." Celine struggled to get out of the person's hold as she shouted. "What's wrong, Celine?" She heard the familiar voice. At this moment, she came back to her right senses and stared at the person that was holding her. At this moment, she was in disbelief. She asked, Jack? Is that really you?" Jack was surprised. He was wondering what was wrong with this girl. When he was coming back from the washroom, he saw her running frantically. It was as if something had happened and she was afraid that if she was late, an even more terrible thing would occur. He had intended to ask her where she was heading when she crashed into him. In a reflex action, he held her by her waist. Of course, he didn't let her go as he was worried about her. And now, as she looked at him with surprise and tears glistening at the corners of her eyes, Jack didn't know what to say. He wondered to himself, has someone claimed that I'm dead or something? "What's going on with you? You were rushing somewhere. Has something happened?" Jack asked after a moment. Celine didn't respond immediately as she looked at him for a while. Then, she buried her head in his chest, hugging him tightly, surprising him again. Since she seemed agitated, Jack decided to wait till she calmed down first before asking again to know what was going on. Collins, who happened to arrive at the scene when Celine buried her head into Jack's embrace, gritted his teeth as anger dominated him. He just couldn't believe that all the girls that he had been chasing, all those that he had marked as his own, were now taken away by the very same person. He felt that he was going crazy. He wondered if the call was just a ploy by Celine to get away from him. Taking a deep breath, he tried calming down as he gazed at the two in the distance with reddened eyes. At that moment, as if feeling his malicious gaze on them, Jack looked up and met Collins's red eyes met with his blue eyes. Looking at the raging Collins, Jack began thinking that it was Collins who Celine was running from. As he thought of this, his gaze turned cold as he glared at him. He wasn't sure, but he decided to ask Celine. If it was true that Collins was actually having some designs on Celine to frighten her to the extent where she ran around like that, he would surely have to make him pay the price. After seeing Collins walking away, Jack hid his anger and stroked Celine's hair. After a few minutes, she calmed down. It was only then that she remembered where they were. Looking around, she noticed that it was true that there were some people who were looking at the two of them. Although there were many people who had their respective partners here, the two of them were just too eye-catching. Not only were they handsome and beautiful, but the way that Celine had been running as if she was being chased had obviously made them curious about what was happening. Separating herself from Jack, Celine took a deep breath before she looked at Jack again, just to make sure that he was real. "Can you enlighten me on why you were running like that and why you were looking at me in such a manner?" Jack asked again when he noticed that Celine was looking around his body, as if she was looking for something. Celine only came back to her senses at this then. "So," she replied, "Angie just called and said that you were injured. She said that you were in an ambulance and you were being taken to Star Hospital." Jack was left speechless. "You're joking, right?" he had to ask, just to make sure that his ears were hearing things correctly. "I'm not joking. I was rushing to get a taxi to the hospital at this time. Had I not bumped into you, I would now be in a taxi now," Celine said seriously. But at the same time, she was confused on why Angie had said that Jack was injured. The Jack that was standing in front of her didn't have a single injury. The white shirt that he was wearing before was still the same. In other words, if he had been injured, this shirt would definitely have been red at this moment. Jack looked at her again. Seeing that she was not joking, he thought that there had to be something wrong. He believed that there was no way that Angie would play such a trick on Celine. "Let's go to the Star Hospital and see what is going on," Jack suggested. "Okay." Celine nodded in response. She too was curious as to why Angie said that Jack was hurt when he was standing in front of her, and he was healthy. The two of them took a taxi and headed to the Star Hospital. This was the biggest hospital in Volant City. Since they had no car in Volant City, they had to take the taxi. Otherwise, with his driving skills, Jack would have surely charged through so that he could arrive there as fast as possible. Although the suspicion that Collins was involved had been reduced, he didn't completely eliminate him. Maybe this was a plan that he had. He might have made Angie tell Celine that he was injured. Then, she would go to Star Hospital. That was the exact reason as to why he decided to go to Star Hospital. He wanted to know what ploy was going on. About 30 minutes later, they arrived at Star Hospital. Jack asked Celine to call Angie, only to realize that her phone had been left behind after she received the call from Angie. But since she knew Angie's number, Jack gave her his phone and she made a call. Immediately after that, Angie informed her that she was in male's ward 67. The two of them immediately headed there. After receiving permission to enter by the reception, they took the elevator to the 4th floor. Jack then asked Celine to go first before he followed behind. Celine wasn't sure why Jack wanted things to be this way. But all the same, she didn't ask a question and went forward according to his plan. Angie was getting anxious. She was pacing around in the corridor. She wasn't alone as a devastated Wendy was there with her. The two girls were so anxious and their eyes were completely reddened, not knowing what to do at that time. When they heard hurried footsteps heading their way, they looked up only to see Celine had arrived. Celine. Angie rushed forward and pulled Celine. Then, she placed her on the waiting bench. "What's going on, Angie? What's going on?" Celine asked. Although she had calmed down since she knew that Jack was okay, she couldn't help but want to know what was going on. Furthermore, the blood on Angie's clothes also made her wonder what the hell was going on. If it was true that Angie was playing a prank on her, there would be no need for her to come here in the hospital's ward. Additionally, the blood on Angie's clothes was real. "I was out at the edge of the forest. I was relaxing when I suddenly saw Jack getting out of the forest. He was injured and was losing so much blood," Angie began explaining. "I'm not sure what happened to him. At that time, he had lost so much blood. The wounds on his body were definitely caused by a blade. He lost consciousness at that time. So, I called for the emergency department that then called for an ambulance. After that, I called the two of you as you were the closest to him," Angie finished. Celine didn't know what and how to respond to Angie. If it was true that Jack was injured, then how come she was with him at that time? Furthermore, he was also here. Could it be that Angie had gotten another person and thought that he was Jack? After all, if the other person was actually full of wounds and blood, he would definitely not have the normal appearance. Maybe that was why Angie confused him to be Jack. "Are you sure that it was Jack?" Celine asked. Angie was dumbfounded at Celine's question. She wasn't the only one, as even Wendy didn't know what was wrong with Celine. Could she be an imposter? After all, the reaction that she was giving at this moment was by far different from what was expected. They knew that she loved Jack, so there was no way that she wouldn't be worried about him when she heard that he was hurt. They were about to ask when they heard another voice asking the same question. "Are you sure about that?" Angie and Wendy both looked at that direction. Their eyes widened in disbelief as they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Jack? How is that possible? Aren't you inside there?" Angie stuttered as she looked at Jack before pointing at the ward. She was sure that Jack was inside there and he was wounded. How the hell was he out of the ward? And what's more, how come he wasn't injured? There wasn't even a scar on him. The furious Collins got back to where his lackeys were waiting for him. He looked at the phone in his hands and decided that he could start by using Celine's phone to get all the information that he could get on Jack. Since Jack was playing both sides with the girls that he had chosen, he had to deal with him earlier. There was a step that when it was crossed, there was no turning back. He knew that being late would allow them time to cross that line. He halted his steps and made a call. "I want someone who's good at hacking to get to Volant City's Adventure Recreation Resort by evening today." After finishing this, he continued walking forward. He wanted to make even more plans. Although he had always tried using the right means to get the two girls to date him, he had to make a change. Since the conventional way wouldn't work, he had to use the unconventional one. Even if he would have to threaten them one after the other or together, he would. Or, even if he had to kidnap them, he wouldn't hesitate. Whatever means worked, he would use as long as he could get his hands on the two ladies that he had been lusting for a few years now. Jack? How is that possible? Aren't you inside there?" Angie stuttered as she looked at Jack before pointing at the ward. She was sure that Jack was inside there and he was wounded. How the hell was he out of the ward? And what's more, how come he wasn't injured? There wasn't even a scar on him. Angie was in disbelief. What else would happen if not this? She could still remember clearly that she had seen Jack being taken into the ward. Furthermore, he was full of injuries. But the Jack in front of her was completely healthy. Could it be that the one that she had taken in was the imposter, or was the one before her an imposter? Thinking things through, she thought that it might be possible. If there are two people who look the same, then one of them had to be an imposter. And the one with the highest probability of being an imposter was the one in front of her. Perhaps he had wanted to kill Jack so that he could take his place. Now that he heard that Jack wasn't dead, he was here to finish him off. The more Angie thought of this, the more vigilant she became. Her gaze became sharp, observing the movements that he was making. Looking at the girl's expression as she looked at him, Jack was dumbfounded. What was wrong with this girl? Had something happened? Shaking his head to dispel the questions in his mind, Jack looked at Angie and asked once again, "Are you sure about what you just said? After all, I'm right here but you're claiming that I'm in the ward." Hearing Jack's question, Angie didn't know how to respond for a moment. She was silent and now, she felt the three gazes on her. She was the only one that had seen the person that was in the ward. Wendy arrived when the doctors had already taken him in the emergency department and were already working hard to infuse more blood into him. As such, they were not allowed in even after they transferred him to the ward. "I'm no longer sure what's going on here. I'm sure that the person that I took inside there is Jack. But at the same time, I can see that Jack is in front of me. I'm completely confused." Angie shook her head as she sat down on the bench. "Jack, do you have a twin brother?" Celine thought of something and asked. "A twin brother? I don't think so. As long as I can remember, it had always been me and my mother. Had I been having a twin brother, how could I have not known till now?" Jack shook his head in disagreement. He couldn't believe that he had a twin brother. That was something that he deemed impossible. If it was true, then he would have grown up with him. As for the matter of the separation of twins at birth, that thought never occurred to him at all. When he was born, his mother was already in the Alfonso family, so he didn't think that there was a nurse or doctor who would have any designs on someone from the Alfonso family in Crystal City. Additionally, he didn't believe that the Alfonso family would play such a trick on him. If that was so, they would have simply gotten his twin brother to marry Wendy, since Jack wasn't agreeing with them. Hearing Jack's answer, not only Celine, but even Wendy was startled. Jack simply said that he had only been with his mother since he was growing up. He didn't mention father. Did that mean that his father never treated him well? They weren't sure. But all the same, they were sad for him. To only grow up with love of a single parent, one could already imagine what would happen. It was also at this moment that they understood why Jack claimed that he was no longer part of the Alfonso family. It turned out that the Alfonso family never treated him fairly. Jonathan Pav. "I'm not sure what is going on at the moment. At first, someone called me Jack. He said that he was there to kill Jack. But, I'm not Jack, I'm Jonathan. When I saw the image in the phone of that assassin that was sent, I thought that it was just a matter of Photoshop. I had not wanted to get involved in a fight as my strength was low at that time. But, it seemed that that guy was serious about killing me. So, although it was difficult for me, I still managed to kill him. With my background, it's not the first time that several assassins have been sent to eliminate me. In the end, none of them left after they came. So, the sight of blood and killing a person didn't stun me at all. I felt nothing as I was used to this since I was 16 years old. After killing, I decided to leave the scene after informing my subordinates to clear it up. I had thought that the injuries that I had suffered from wouldn't cause me much problem. In the end, I had overestimated myself. As I edged towards the end of the forest, I could feel my consciousness blurring and I immediately knew that I was going to lose consciousness. And if that happened, as long as I didn't receive first aid immediately, I would die from losing much blood. It would have been better if my subordinates found me. But in the end, with the way that things were, there was no way that I could go back as I had walked too far from the scene. The only choice that I had at that moment was to continue forward. So, I hurried my pace and managed to arrive at the edge of the forest. Then, I felt that I couldn't hold on anymore. But at that moment, I heard someone shouting at me. "Jack, what happened to you?" It was a lady who asked after she screamed. Just as I was about to fall, she caught me on time. But there it was again, I was being mistaken for Jack. At first, it could have been a coincidence or someone was simply plotting against me. But the second time, not to mention that the person showed no malicious intentions, she even showed concern towards me. At that time, I thought that, maybe, there was someone called Jack. He was the reason as to why I was attacked, but also the reason as to why I was saved. All the same, I still had a question in mind, what was going on for me to be confused for Jack? Then, everything went black as I lost my consciousness. Now, I can feel that the pain that I was facing had been greatly reduced. I can feel that my consciousness was coming back. I can now feel things. To me, it was like I had been in a short period of slumber. But, I know that it might even be an hour since I lost my consciousness. And feeling that there are things that are wrapped around my arms and other parts of my body that were wounded. I can already tell that I'm in a hospital. After all, just the smell of medicine in the air is enough proof. I release a sigh of relief. Then, I try opening my eyes. And as I look at the white ceiling, I'm forced to take a deep breath as I think of how I came here. Something happened back at home. I was attacked just like usual, but the attacker at that time was far stronger than the ones that came before. Additionally, this person had some kind of poison that when he used on me, my strength plummeted. Had it not been for the fact that my most trusted subordinate arrived in time, I might have been killed at that time. To hide from the danger, I decided to stay away from home for a year so that I could recover. Although I wasn't sure when I would recover, at least I felt that I would need at least a year for that drug or poison that is infecting me to be dispelled from my body. As for antidotes, I tried looking for them but I never managed to find any. At the end of the day, I had to use time to save myself. During this 1 year, I have been staying in the western province, roaming from city to city, making sure that I never stayed in the same city for more than a month. But there was only one city that I had stayed in for more than a month. It was called Crystal City. Of course, I never stayed there for 2 consecutive months, but I always stayed there for a month before leaving for 2. During one of the months there, I had managed to save a girl. And although I had met many girls back at home, this girl felt special. But I decided not to get involved with her, lest she fell in danger. But all the same, I always found myself back at the place that I had saved her. Perhaps that was the reason as to why I found Crystal City interesting. A question without answers. Tap, tap, tap. I'm suddenly jolted back to reality from my memories by the sound of footsteps approaching my bed. Turning my head, I can see that it is a man with a white coat. I assume this is the doctor that is attending to me. Mr. Jack, how are you feeling? The man asks. Is there any abnormality that you think should be taken care of? The doctor asks again. I think I'm good. I reply. As for the second question, I have an impulse to reply that he should take care of the issue of naming. I'm Jonathan and not Jack. All the same, I manage to hold back my impulse and remain silent. After hearing my reply, the doctor nods and picks up a file that was placed beside my bed on a small cabinet. After writing some things, he looks at me and says, "You have a few people here, including the one that brought you here. Do you want to see them?" I think there's no harm in knowing what was going on and who this Jack was. I have to at least clarify that I'm not Jack. So, I nod my head in response. Seeing this, the doctor leaves the room without saying a word. Seeing that nobody was going to come in for at least a minute, I decide to look around the ward. At least, it's not shabby. I think to myself. The room that was used as my ward only had me in it, not sharing it with other patients. And currently, there's still blood being injected into my body in drips. Had I been in my peak state, I wouldn't have needed this as my regeneration could make up for the loss of blood as long as I rested enough. At this time, I hear the door being opened. Then, one after the other, 4 people step in. The first one was the girl that had saved me. She still had the same clothes that had blood marks on it. The next one gave me a surprise. She's actually the girl that I had saved back then. As for the third person, she too was a beautiful lady. I can't help but stare at her for a few more seconds. The last person, I immediately get up and sit on the bed as I stare at the young man that had entered the ward. Jack and the 3 girls waited outside the door for almost an hour before a doctor came and went into the ward. After about 5 minutes, he came out and looked at Angie, whose clothes still had blood on them. He was just about to ask a question when he gazed at Jack deeply. After a while, he asked, "Is that your twin brother inside there?" Jack was once again dumbfounded by the question. What the heck? Does that mean that what Angie was saying was actually true? There was actually another person that looked like him inside the ward? Now, his curiosity of that person was piqued. He wanted to know about this person. One had to know that it was hard to find someone that looks like you in the world. Although there was always someone's lookalike, for that person to look like him, to the extent that they thought that they were actually twins, then that person must be really more than just a lookalike. All the same, he still responded, "Not at all. I don't even know him." Hearing Jack's answer, the doctor was stunned. Then, he thought that maybe Jack was simply messing with him for asking the obvious, or he had a conflict with his brother. But at this moment, he leaned towards the second option considering Jack's serious expression. "Young man, you 2 are brothers. Even if you have a conflict, you should resolve it as soon as possible. Anyway, I can see that you still care about him and that is why you are here to see him." The doctor smiled and said. "Jack." Before he could even say a word, the doctor spoke once again, "You can go and see him. After that, you can ask a nurse to bring you to my office. There are a few questions that I need to ask you guys about, especially young lady." As he said these last words, his gaze landed on Angie. Immediately after saying his piece, the doctor left, not giving Jack a chance to say a word or ask a question. Seeing that the doctor had left, Angie was the first one to rush towards the ward. She wanted to make sure that what she saw was true. Wendy followed behind her and Celine and Jack entered last respectively. When Jack got into the ward, he was full of curiosity. But the moment that his gaze landed on the young man on the bed, his movements froze. He wasn't the only one with such a reaction, as both Wendy and Celine stopped, not making any movements for a long while. On the other hand, Angie looked at the young man on the bed before looking at Jack. Just to make sure that she wasn't hallucinating, she made sure to look at the two of them at least 10 times each. At this trice, two blue eyes met with each other and they locked onto the other. The youth that was on the bed immediately sat up as he gazed at Jack. On the other hand, Jack gazed back at him. In the eyes of the two, confusion was clear, as none of them could understand why and how that person looked like themselves. Jack was now completely suspicious of this person, and the curiosity that had been growing in his heart grew even further. He had always considered his silver hair and blue eyes a unique pair. As long as he could remember, he had never seen anyone with silver hair other than his mother. As for blue eyes, there were several people with them. But what he knew was that they didn't have silver hair. And that was the reason as to why he paired the two, just to make his eyes special. But now, he had to reevaluate things, as the youth on the bed had exactly the same features as him. He had silver hair, blue eyes, same physique. As for the face, he couldn't prove if they looked the same, as there were several bandages on his face. But all the same, he could see something like the nose bridge that looked just like his. The way that his body was the exact replica of the other. But there was still a difference between the two of them. Jack had the air of a cold and indifferent person, to those that he wasn't familiar to, of course. On the other hand, the youth had a domineering aura, as if he was someone that was used to being at the top. "Who are you?" the two of them asked each other, pointing a finger forward. Their words brought back the three ladies from their stupor. Processing the words that the two of them had asked, they could immediately tell that the two of them didn't know each other. They were strangers. But the funny thing to the three ladies was the fact that they could see two people who looked like the other, having a voice that sounded like the other, with a minor difference, pointing a finger at each other, as if they were accusing the other. "I'm Jack." Jack replied. "I'm Jonathan." At the same time, the youth replied. Silence then reigned in the room for a while as nobody spoke. On the other hand, it was as if the three girls had an epiphany. They could finally tell who the real Jack was. They were sure that if the two were placed in front of the other and they wore the same outfits, it would be like a person looking at his image in the mirror. The silence didn't last for long though. Jack asked, "What are you doing here?" On the other hand, Jonathan responded, "What do you mean by what am I doing here? It's not like I'm prohibited from moving around, right?" Jack took a deep breath. He knew that this wasn't the right question to ask. All the same, he wondered why this person was here. And why was he all injured? "Why are you injured like that? Got into a fight?" Jack asked again. For the first time, Jack took the initiative to get to know another man. "It's because of you," Jonathan said begrudgingly. Me? How's that caused by me? This is the first time that we are meeting. How can I cause you to be this injured?" Jack was completely stunned, not knowing what to do. "Someone attacked me, claiming that I'm Jack. Like hell I'm Jack. I'm Jonathan for FCK's sake." Jonathan cursed at the thought of how he ended in such a miserable state due to a simple misunderstanding. "How's that my fault? I never told you to look like me," Jack retorted. How could he simply accept the blame? "You are the one that looks like me. I'm older than you. You were born after me after all." Jonathan pointed at Jack as he talked back fiercely. "How are you older than me? You don't know about me at all." "No, wait a moment, since my mind is more mature to think of such a thing. I believe that I'm older than you, so, you looked like me." As the girls watched as the two youths behaved like kids, arguing about some childish things, they had an urge to laugh, but they held it in. But they were forced to have solemn expressions on their faces in the next moment because of what they heard. Jonathan was mistaken to be Jack and was attacked. Didn't that mean that had Jonathan not been present, it would have been Jack who would have been on the bed now? Furthermore, perhaps he might have been in a worse condition, as none of them could guarantee that he could have performed better than Jonathan. As they thought of this, they were scared out of their wits. It was also after a period of mindless arguing that Jack caught on to something. His gaze turned cold as he asked, "Did you just say that someone wanted me dead?" Jonathan didn't want to continue arguing with Jack, but there was no way that he was going to give up. So, he was relieved that Jack had changed the topic. And he was more than happy to cooperate. What else did you expect? See, I'm now all injured because of you, so, you will have to compensate me. Jonathan replied. The pain that he was feeling had already reduced drastically. Now, he could at least move his limbs in small motions as long as he didn't apply too much force. Someone wants to kill me? That's new. I don't think that I have an enemy that I have offended to the extent that they will want me dead. But, who the FCK is it? As Jack asked these questions, the air around him seemed to freeze as killing intent surged into the air. The girls were scared and were forced to take a few steps away from Jack. On the other hand, Jonathan looked at Jack with a surprised expression. That aura, could it be? He thought to himself. Remembering that there were other people around him, Jack calmed down and looked at Jonathan and asked, "Do you have anything that can prove that person's identity?" Jonathan was brought out of his thoughts. In response to Jack's question, he pointed at the cabinet beside his bed and said, "I assume that my things are in there. If so, there should be a phone there with a screen of 6. Jack raised his brows a little. Then, he went forward and opened the cabinet. He found that there were 2 phones and a wallet in there. He picked the phone that had a screen that was 6 inches. He pressed the power button and activated the screen. He tried looking into it only to see that he still needed to unlock it with a password. Looking at Jonathan, he said, "I don't know the password." "How's that my problem?" Jonathan shrugged his shoulders and replied. Jack was displeased, but there was nothing that he could do. It was already good that he could get something that could lead him to the person behind the incident. He thought for a moment and decided that he would have Denali hack into this thing. With that thought in mind, he placed the phone in his trouser pocket. "By the way, what's your mother's name?" Jonathan asked. Not knowing why he was asking, Jack still replied, "Anne, is there a problem?" "What did you just say?" Jonathan got onto his feet, completely ignoring that he was still having a needle in the vein on his hand. "By the way, what's your mother's name?" Jonathan asked. Not knowing why he was asking, Jack still replied, "Anne, is there a problem?" "What did you just say?" Jonathan got onto his feet, completely ignoring that he was still having a needle in the vein on his hand. Seeing his reaction, Jack looked at him and asked in surprise, "Do you know my mother?" This was a great surprise to him. All along, his mother has never mentioned about her origin. If it just so happened that Jonathan knew something about that, he would really appreciate having someone that could tell him about her. He was curious about her origin. "I know her. Although I have never seen her before, I have seen her photos back at home," Jonathan replied enthusiastically. "Where's your home?" Jack was both happy and curious as to why his mother's photo was there in Jonathan's home. "Actually, me and you are cousins," Jonathan stated after sighing. Then, he continued, "Your mother Anne, and my mother Anita are twins. My mother always talked about your mother all this while. She has her photos that they had taken together. So, I have always wanted to see her." Jonathan's revelation shocked not only Jack but even the ladies that were listening from the side. How could they have expected that the two, who looked similar to each other, were actually related to each other? As if to prove what he was saying, Jonathan took his phone from the cabinet. After tapping for a while, he showed Jack the image of 2 ladies with arms around each other's shoulder. Jack's pupils contracted as he looked at the image of the 2. Although they were twins, he could already distinguish his mother as he could see the clothes design that she liked. Added together with the fact that the 2 of them looked the same, added to another fact that Jonathan knew his mother's name, Jack had no choice but to believe that it was true that they were cousins. "It seems that just like me, you took on your mother's features." Jonathan smiled as he said this. He really was ecstatic. He was looking forward to meeting with his aunt for a long time. His mother had told him that she had a sister. She had left home because she claimed that she loved someone. The family obviously hadn't agreed to her being married to someone that they didn't know. So, Anne had left secretly, completely disappearing. They had tried looking for her but they had never managed to find her. After all, she had stopped using her cards, she never traveled and so on. She was from a big family at the end of the day. So, she knew some of the basic things that could make others know of her location. And since she had left, it had already been 2 decades. Jack didn't respond to Jonathan's comment. He stayed silent for a long while before he asked, "Can you tell me what you know about my mother?" Thinking that Jack was still not sure that he knew his mother, Jonathan went ahead and talked about Anne. Each and everything that he said was from what he had heard from Anita. It turned out that his mother Anne was from a big reclusive family called Jezda. The 2 of them, Anne and Anita, were twins, and were the only daughters of their parents. They had 2 brothers who were older than them. In other words, Jack had 2 uncles and 1 aunt. As for their father, although he wasn't the current family head, he was second to the family head, who was his elder brother. So, he had a lot of authority in the family, just below his elder brother who was the family head. The 2 sisters had always treated each other well. In the big family, it was obvious that there were many jealous people who had their own selfish desires. So, they would make their own plots. Although none of the plots were sinister, they were nothing good to the victim. Some of their uncles and aunts had planned to have the family gain relationship with other big families through marriage. The target was obviously the 2 sisters. They looked for ways to make the girls disagree with the marriage by trying to introduce a marriage between them and someone whose character was definitely nothing but thrash. Of course, in order for this not to be seen as a blatant way of attacking the other, they would choose those young masters with a good background. In this way, they would claim that they were doing this for the good of the family. They had tried it on Anita, but, lucky for her, she had already fallen in love with someone that was from a good and acceptable background. So, the plans failed as the family had agreed to the 2 of them getting married. On the other hand, Anne was different. She had fallen in love with someone, but that person had no big background. So, she dared not to introduce him to the family. In the end, the schemers found a scumbag who liked changing women like clothes, claiming that he was a well-behaved and model man. He was good to be her partner for life. Anne didn't agree to this. This then led to a big argument in the family. In the end, with the help of Anita, Anne had managed to sneak away. Anita had helped her in covering her traces. The day that they had parted ways, 20 years ago, was the last time that the 2 sisters had met and spoke to each other. And although Anita would have really wanted to see her sister, for her sister's happiness, she decided not to look for her until in the recent years where she couldn't hold it anymore and tried looking for her. She had tried calling her since 2 years ago, using the number that Anne had registered using Anita's ID, but she found that the number was no longer in service. This had made her stressed up. But all the same, she had been trying to find ways of getting her sister back. Now that 2 decades had gone by, she was sure that although she might be punished, there was no way that they would force her to marry another person at her age. Jonathan, on the other hand, was one of the competitors for the seat of the family head. In order to assist his mother, he had decided to go for that position. In a family like Jezda, it was not a matter of inheritance where the father would pass the position of the family head to the son. Instead, it was a competition between the young masters of the family, to decide who was the most competent to lead the family. Since he had decided to join the competition, he had faced several threats. He was sure that all of these were orchestrated by his competitors and their families. Luckily, he was strong enough to survive till today. But all the same, although he had tried finding ways to prove that they were the ones that had attacked him, he never succeeded as these people were always careful with whatever they did. He too had managed to handle himself for a few years before he was caught off guard the previous year. The assassin that they had sent when he was out in an official business was actually far stronger than the previous ones. The 2 of them had fought for a long time. And seeing that he was losing, the assassin had resorted to using a special poison that had in return weakened him greatly. Had he been at his peak, a small fry like Viper wouldn't even manage to touch the corner of his clothes. Jack and the others finally understood what it meant to survive in a family that was full of schemers. Although Jack's half-brothers and sisters had always schemed against him, after hearing how the Jezda family was, he thought that the Alfonso family was nothing. Celine, on the other hand, was the only heir to the family business. Although she was a girl, she had the abilities and was supported by her parents who were just as capable, together with her grandparents. Wendy as well as Angie had the same situation. They were not heirs and so, they had no pressure on them. Additionally, Wendy was always dotted on by her grandfather, Alton Farrell. So, nobody really dared to make a move on her as that person would end up in a really bad position. Taking a deep breath, although he was curious and would have really wanted to meet this aunt of his, Jack decided that he would only do that once his strength was higher than the Jezda family. The Jezda family was a reclusive one and wasn't one of those that publicized their wealth. Currently, they had assets that were worth hundreds of billions. Added to their relationship with other families that were connected to them through marriages, he was sure that he couldn't compare with them, at least for now. He was sure that the moment that these people knew that his mother was Anne, they would try venting their frustrations on him as Anne had foiled their plans by running away. Although he had a system, he wasn't ready to be suppressed for a long time before he even managed to upgrade the system to level 2. "By the way, where's your mother? I would like to see her," Jonathan asked excitedly after he finished his narration. He was now on the bed, with his back on the headboard. Looking at the enthusiastic Jonathan, Jack shook his head and said, "She died a few years ago." "What, are you serious?" Jonathan jumped onto his feet and asked incredulously. His voice was filled with disbelief and shock.